Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 93 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Brian, you are on the road again. Where are you at tonight?
I'm in a parking lot in somewhere in Atlanta. So if you hear any background noises, it's like it could be a shooting, it could be a frog, it could be anything. I'm in Atlanta. You never know what might happen here.
And that laugh you heard was a severely over-caffeinated Cody Bunch. How you doing tonight, Cody?
I'm doing roughly mediocre, but the caffeine is fixing that problem for me. So,
and we're just so everyone out there, we're recording this our usual time. We tend to record a little late at night, and yeah, I've had a bunch of caffeine here tonight too, and so it's going to be an interesting podcast this evening. But
night, what is that, man? Can't sleep.
Exactly.
Can't sleep. The clowns wake me. Okay.
So Cody, the reason we asked you to come on tonight is there's this kind of really interesting thing going on in the industry that there's a lot of kind of the VMware people that kind of grew up in virtualization, and they're starting to embrace cloud and more specifically starting to really embrace OpenStack as a project, as a product. And so tell us a little bit about where you've been and where you're going, because we've had a lot of people on here who are like, oh, I'm the founders of OpenStack, but you're not, right? So you're one of these people. So tell us a little bit about what you had going on, man.
Well, so I started. This entire journey starts about 6 years ago. I got hired at Rackspace as a Windows sysadmin. Like there was some family drama. Had to move out to Texas. Move out in really, really quickly. So went from zero to hired at Rackspace in a handful of days. Started out as a Windows sysadmin. For me personally, that got boring very quick. I was doing VoIP at a South Florida telco provider that was like, "Hey, we're revolutionary. We'll protect you from hurricane-proof your business and your phone system and so forth." Right. And before that, I was at a prep school that did the first laptop program in the nation and so on. So I was used to being in the midst of really, really cool things going on in the technology world. So the Windows sysadmin thing for me personally just wasn't working out, and Rackspace at the time was starting to explore, like, hey, what is this virtualization? Can we launch this as a product and so forth? And I went ahead and jumped right in. Fast forward a bunch of years, a number of VMworlds later, a couple of podcasts and a blog thing, and it came time to where what's interesting, what's next, what can I go learn? And so for me, technology for me is just a way to continuously be learning and be interacting and be doing cool things, and the cloud and OpenStack lets me do that. So, how did I transition from VMware to OpenStack in the day job? It was as simple as changing teams, really. I was a architect for the Rackspace VMware product, and then got involved with a product group that kind of through a number of little internal, what's that little game they play where they put the marble under the shells, the shell game, right? So through a number of shell shuffles or so, I ended up working on the Rackspace private cloud product, and right now I'm not even sure off the top of my head what the name of my particular group is this week. And hey, if you work in a big org, you will know exactly how that works, right? Like, what team are you on? I work with these people.
Yep.
That's not any discount to the Rackspace private cloud stuff. We're really doing some cool stuff. And so that's what I jumped in and started doing. And just the blogs and the podcasts and everything else are an extension of like, hey, I'm learning this thing and I don't ever want to have to learn it twice, right? So, like, the VMware blog started out as, hey, as I'm solving these tickets, I'm starting to see some repetitive issues. Let me start blogging about them, and that way, it was just a quick reference sheet, right? Like before WordPress became so easy or self-publishing became so easy, I kept a giant file in Notepad, right?
So you bring up an interesting point, and so for those that don't know out there, so Cody has this huge podcast. Well, I mean, you've written books, you've done blogs, but the podcast out there is the vBrownBag, and it's you and Damien. And
there's a lot of us now.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm like struggling because there's so many of them, right?
I would feel bad if we left anyone out. So
we're just going to name them. Just go look it up. No, yeah. But the thing that was amazing was it is probably. Would you say it is probably one of the largest virtualization podcasts that is out there today?
Honestly, I don't know how to rate it. I am proud of what it is and what it's become and the name recognition that it gets both at VMworld and other like vMugs and so forth. Last year, the podcast and the Orchestrator book, like I got to be a world traveler and I hopped across the U.S. to a whole bunch of different vMugs for folks that were requesting me. They either knew me through the book or through the podcast or through the Twitters and thought I might have had something interesting to say, right?
And then what you did is you kind of took the vBrownBag, which was typically a very VMware virtualization centric podcast, and it's really it still has that vBrownBag VMware aspect to it, but you've added in OpenStack over time as a kind of an additional topic. Is it different feeds? Is it same feed? And how did everyone react to that? So
I'm still trying to judge the reaction. Like the OpenStack stuff is getting a great amount of traction. We're currently doing like a couched OpenStack program, which is so we dove in about 4 or 5 months ago. 4 or 5 months, is that about right? February. We dove in around February because I'm not going to try to count months this late at night. Into the OpenStack things, and we did a couple of intros, and then it seemed like we ended up too deep in the pond too quickly. So a lot of the folks that were making the transition or joining us fresh, they're like, hey, I've heard about this OpenStack thing, but like you're talking about dispersion reports in Swift, and I'm not entirely sure what it, So we went ahead and started working our way back out from that. And so the couched OpenStack is an effort in it. So right, here's the tie-in for the currently working book. It works alongside the OpenStack Cloud Computing Cookbook that I'm working on with Kevin Jackson, and we're updating that to the Grizzly Edition. The Couched OpenStack podcast vBrownBags also tracks right alongside that. So you start out with nothing. Where we deviate from the cookbook is because I have an hour-long weekly slot to fill. It's not just here's this thing how you build it, like you gather all these 6 ingredients and mix them together and like out comes a keystone. But we also get to spend time explaining how auth and keystone works and what steps there are, like as you ask for an instance, where is it checking keystone, how like you auth, you get a token, Nova checks your token, Glance checks your token, so on and so forth as that instance comes up. So we get to go into a lot more detail there. And this will, in theory, right, is my first time trying to like ghetto teach a class. So in theory, it'll help everyone that's like admin architect get a good feel for what OpenStack is, how to build one, or how to operate one, or how to design one. So I'm aiming for a number of audiences there.
And that actually ties in really well to my next question of, there's a lot of VMware people out there. There's a lot of, especially the vBrownBag listeners historically. Tell us a little bit about how VMware and OpenStack, both technically and quite frankly religiously, right? How do they differ, and how have you handled that transition, and like for the your listeners, our listeners, if they're looking to learn and start, where do you recommend they start?
So start with so honestly, that there still is not a great answer to that question. There are a few good answers, right? The OpenStack Cookbook makes one effort in that area. OpenStack.org and the wiki and the documentation is very good. If it's not, feel free to go ahead and update. Like one of the catchphrases I've learned is I interface more with this community is like pull requests are accepted. Right. So if there's something wrong and you have a fix for it, go ahead and fix, and then go ahead and like make a pull request against the GitHub. The OpenStack documentation folks actually did a vBrownBag where they demonstrated live how to contribute to the OpenStack documentation. So it's like git checkout, make a few changes, or was it git clone, make a branch, make a few changes, push your branch, make a pull request, right?
So the thing that's always been interesting to me about vBrownBag, and for anybody who isn't already a listener or is kind of picking up on Cody for the first time, like on our show we tend to have a lot of folks who sometimes are sort of big thinkers or starting companies and stuff. You guys are very much in hands-on stuff. How does it work? Operational, sharing scripts, sharing code, which is very cool. And like one of the things I've noticed, just from going to a bunch of different OpenStack events and DevOps events, because Aaron and I will go to the ones in RTP or we'll go to various OpenStack ones. It feels like, I don't know, a year ago, even 6 to 8 months ago, it was a lot of, you'd go to these things and every single one of them was, this is OpenStack, and it started at NASA, and Rackspace is involved, and here's the project. And now it very much feels like people are getting through that question that Aaron just asked, which was, how do I get started? What are a set of good tools to use? Who can I go to get config? Like, do you feel like it's gotten over that hump to where, a discussion at the technical level you kind of talk about make more sense now? Or, are you seeing that trend happening?
A lot of that actually feels like it's tracking as the projects themselves get more and more stable. So during the early versions of OpenStack, there were like massive API changes between versions, massive functionality changes between, between, was it Bear and Cactus and Diablo and so on. As the projects are starting to stabilize and mature and so on, and more large folks are getting this deployed out in production, those conversations are starting to change. As far as like where do I jump off as a VMware admin and into the OpenStack world, that question is also becoming easier to answer, right? So, like I said, the cookbooks, the vBrownBags, and so forth, they all, and the OpenStack docs and so forth, are all really good jumping off resources. In fact, in the last 6 to 8 months, the number of folks blogging about OpenStack and such has changed as well. So a lot of the conversation is moving out of the developer world. Not that the conversation in the developer world is shrinking, but a lot of as more and more folks are paying attention, a lot of it's moving out of IRC and into like, this is how I did this is how I solved that problem, and so forth. So
does that make it feel like the early days of virtualization blogs and when, way back when all of us kind of got picked up by VMware and syndicated on VMware? Because I noticed the OpenStack site actually has a call now where you can submit your feed, and they kind of have a master feed of all the blogs. And so they're starting to replicate some of those things that historically have worked well for other companies in the past.
I think you answered the question yourself.
That works. So, hey, Cody, let me ask you this. So, growing up VMware, if I use that term, what was kind of one of the biggest aha moments when it comes to using OpenStack, of like something that was really challenging to wrap your head around, or something that was just like really, really cool?
So what's really, really cool is the fact that we can podcast here in my home office and not have a tremendous amount of server background noise. Okay? Like, that is what my transition to OpenStack has done. I have one Open Compute box and 2 baby dragons and an IX4 and everything else, and like my entire former VMware lab sits powered off and useless right now. It's not useless, right? I could spin up an OpenStack lab locally, but I now have a number of Vagrant scripts that work with the Rackspace provider or the more generic OpenStack provider that I can point at any private cloud I've stood up at work and start working from there, right? So it's changed how I interface with things. In the VMware world, at least as I grew up in it, and this predates Rackspace, is like we would stand up a VMware environment. We would go ahead and throw our Exchange server, our Active Directory, and a lot of our behemoths, right? Our the software and enterprise apps and whatever that are, like, I don't want to say boat anchors because they're absolutely necessary, but they're also very slow moving, right? It's like steering the Titanic away from an iceberg, although it's probably also not appropriate. But the ability to bring up a short-lived instance, run a quick set of processing things, and then tear it down, and like it's the entirety of this is ephemeral. And grasping that as a concept is what's really made this transition easier for me, right? And actually, what helped it, believe it or not, was another product from Nick Marshall and Alistar out of the Asia Pacific brown bags, which was Autolab. And Autolab, if you're a VMware listener and are getting ready for your VCP or need to spin up a VMware lab environment and such, is basically a set of shell VMs and build time scripts that let you build out an entire vSphere and vCloud Director and so on environment in about 8 gigs of RAM on your laptop. And it takes about an hour or two or 3, depending on how slow your box is and your storage and so forth. But you hit go, you walk away, you go out, take a long lunch, and poof, you have a VMware lab. You run a couple of tests, you know, and so forth. You want to get your feet wet in vCloud Director. You want to go ahead and run a couple of scenarios for your vCap DCA. You tear the lab back down. You spin it back up again. Everything is fresh. You don't have to worry about any troubleshooting or whatever from any legacy issues you may have introduced into the environment. And so that got me starting to think about things in an ephemeral fashion, and then cloud started to solidify that, right?
So I'm going to switch gears for a second and talk about, so you've written a good number of books. You know, you've written some VMware books and you've written some OpenStack books. That VMware book was probably more of the closed mentality and kind of almost represents the community and the proprietary nature of the products, versus the OpenStack really being more almost community based, right? And
so
what has that process been like?
So the orchestrator book for the VMware stuff was me, as I guess you're getting at the different approaches to the book writing.
Exactly.
Okay. So the orchestrator book was me as a single author with VMware Press, which, by the way, is a great publisher. They're a branch of Pearson, and like I'm saying this, there's no additional compensation or whatever going on, right? They were excellent to work with. The OpenStack Cloud Computing Cookbook is not so much a community effort, right? Kevin and I will tweet out and ask for help occasionally, but it's not as interactive as the OpenStack Security Guide was, where it was myself and I don't want to quote the number wrong, 12, 14, 16 other folks, and we were basically, I don't want to say locked in the conference room, but we were in Annapolis, we were in a conference room all week, and it was a collaborative book writing process. Had a whole bunch of eyes on ideas and what we wanted in the book and how we wanted the book, and then started to form that into an outline, and then from there broke into individual groups to start conquering parts of the outline. And then the 100 hands approach to editing after the fact was like it's a different thing to behold. So like in writing the orchestrator book and the cookbook, it's a lot of late nights. It's like having a second job. The orchestrator book in particular, like I'd get home from work, eat dinner, work on orchestrator book, right? Lather, rinse, repeat until it was done. Whereas the security guide was like, if I had a question, I didn't have to go through a million different scenarios and different labs and whatever, because there was somebody else in the room that knew the answer, right? Or if they didn't know the answer, like it 3 hops to Kevin Bacon kind of thing. So,
and it's basically like a room full of tech editors sitting right there.
Yeah, a room full of tech editors, and then there's some folks that are stronger copy editors versus tech edits and so on. So, like all in all, it I would do it again, but I would also go the other route again as well. It's two different approaches that both feel all right. It's kind of hard, unless you've been part of a book sprint, it's kind of hard to describe the energy, the feel, and the, like, hey, we spent the first day and a half, 2 days outlining the book. So, like, we only had 3 days left to get writing and editing and publishing done. So watching it all come together that quick with that quality of material and so on was impressive.
So a lot of times, when it's like OpenStack Summit or some of the big events, the focus, so, the big transition people are kind of going through is, VMware environments tend to be focused on, like you said, sort of your big, heavy enterprise apps and so forth, or more traditional stateful apps. A lot of the talk that you hear from folks is, OpenStack is more of a new app, modern app type of thing. When you're sitting around those tables, and you're talking to folks that are kind of living and breathing it, is most of the discussion about new apps, or are folks still trying to figure out how you would, migrate existing stuff? Or what's the tone of the discussions? Is it app centric? Is it still infrastructure centric? Is it modernize? Is it convert? What do you hear in kind of the broader sense when you talk to technologists, folks that that sort of have your level of depth?
It's all over the place, to be honest. And it really depends on what the other side of that conversation is and where they're at. A lot of folks at providers will be looking at not necessarily stateful apps or next-gen apps, but just a way to build a cloud without the burden of vCloud Director, or they want to provide the open set of APIs that OpenStack provides, where you'll have SMBs looking at it because, hey, Windows Small Business Server was a great idea too, right? And so there's, depending on what that person's concerns are, you'll hear different aspects of that conversation. So.
Okay, so it isn't sort of one side of the fence or the other. It is, people are just looking at it across all sorts of business challenges or business applications.
Yep.
Now I'll ask this though. So from a technical standpoint, you kind of hear over and over again through various sources in the OpenStack community that it's kind of like, well, but OpenStack doesn't necessarily address some of those maybe traditional or older or legacy workloads or whatever terms you want to use. You being much more technical, do you agree with that? Disagree with that? What do you see in like day-to-day operations of OpenStack, or like in the cookbook or in the vBrownBags or anything like that?
So a lot of the cookbook and vBrownBags are focused on, in particular, my effort to learn this set of technologies, right? As far as, OpenStack won't do this or OpenStack doesn't do that, like any good technology or architecture or so on, it's as good as how you design it, right? And with OpenStack, right, if it doesn't do it today, wait 6 months kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So if you submit a blueprint for like HA Horizon or so and have effort and work behind it and present this at the summit and so on, and it makes sense to the community as a whole and the direction they want to take, then wait 6 months. There are a lot of features today that weren't there prior. One of the bigger ones for me is like instances are entirely ephemeral, right? You don't want to store your accounting data on there because you lose the instance, and it's oops, right? So somebody accidentally the business, right? But you attach a Cinder volume, and that Cinder volume is presented from an object, or sorry, from a block store, say a NetApp or Linux iSCSI or EMC or what have you, based on your plugin. That storage is designed more appropriately to be more resilient. So, like, the resiliency features are getting there. The business critical nature of apps, and even the business critical nature of not ephemeral apps. The word is not coming to me.
So basically, what you're saying is in that particular instance, like typically what you see is the high availability or resiliency is built into the application, but if you say put a Cinder volume underneath it, and that Cinder volume typically is hosted off of, say, a SAN, well, you now have that ability to maybe host some of those apps that aren't necessarily built in the quote unquote new way, right? You're looking at something that could run a traditional application at that point.
Potentially, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like I said, that conversation is perpetually evolving as the OpenStack projects themselves evolve.
The one little thing I'll throw in there, and this is just a plug because I know you're doing a thing at VMworld for vBrownBag. I don't know if you're allowed to legally talk about it, but I know you do a big thing, whether it's a tweet up or whatever. One of the things I'd throw in the bag if you can get a sponsor to make up the cards or something for you. Like, I get a ton of people when I talk to them about it that when you start talking about Vagrant and Glance and Swift and Puppet and Chef, and they kind of scratch their head, and it's like, what do those terms mean? And if somebody would make like a really simple, Vagrant does this thing, right? This is its function, or Puppet does this thing, or Swift is different than Cinder, like almost the idiot's guide for just the terminology and the project names, or relate it to something that everybody knows. Like, that would be a great handout to stick in whatever brown bag giveaways you have for people. I think you'd get a ton of folks who would go, oh, that's my quick guide. I always go look at that. And so when Cody talks about spinning up a Vagrant script and pull stuff from Git, that's what he's talking about.
So I had one of those about 65% done before the last OpenStack Summit. Just life got in the way of finishing that, right? So like book deadlines and other things all got in the way of knocking that out. But I do have somewhere in the cloud or on this hard drive or what in the cloud. Drink. That's an ongoing vBrownBag game, by the way. Like if somebody says in the cloud or to the cloud, like take a shot. I don't know if they do it here because your listeners aren't as live, but like we are recorded, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So everyone drink at home.
That's right, including the NSA, since we're on Skype.
Well, I'll tell you what. Like you can put this 30 seconds on repeat here and drink all you want, right? No, honey, it's okay. They keep saying cloud.
Nice. All right. Well, you know what? I think we're about at that mark. So, Cody, where can everyone find out more about you, what you got going on, your books, your podcast, everything else?
So the podcasts are on iTunes or RSS feeds, bit.ly brownbag podcast, professionalvmware.com/brownbags for show notes and links and so on and so forth. For the OpenStack end of those, openstack.provv12n.com, and then, of course, follow me on Twitter, Cody_Bunch.
Very cool. Thank you very much. So, if you like the show, please tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter at thecloudcastnet or on the web at thecloudcast.net, where you can find links to everything Cloudcast. Thanks for listening.